This past week, I attended the Bica conference. Actually, it's last week, I guess. It was a good conference. I participated as usual. It's an online conference, and Bica stands for Biologically Inspired Cognitive Architectures. And so the lab actually has been going to this conference for several years now, and we've been presenting every year. And we have sort of this, I don't want to call it an ecosystem, but sort of this whole constellation of things that we've been doing over the past several years. And I wanted to review those in the meeting. So let me see. Okay, so we've been contributing to this conference. This is Bica Ai, so it's Biologically Inspired Cognitive Architectures. I did a short overview at last week's Saturday morning NeuroSim meeting, and that's on the Orthogonal Lab YouTube channel. So if you want to go and find out more about the conference, you can find out there. Basically, it has an interesting history. It's been around for maybe about 15 to 20 years, and it kind of grew out of these cognitive architectures that have been around since the 1980s and 1990s. So the cognitive architecture is where you approach AI from this perspective of cognition being the key element, but also biological inspiration. So you build these large architectures with boxes and arrows that have different cognitive functions, and then you kind of build models around that. So you enable these cognitive architectures to do certain things, different information processing tasks, and you can incorporate like modern AI components. You can incorporate what they call neurosymbolic platforms, so where you're combining neural networks and symbolic models. So you can do all these sorts of things. They're very flexible, and it's not in the mainstream of AI, but it's definitely it's a different. When you go to the conference, it's a different take on AI. If you've ever been to NeurIPS, or we've reviewed like NeurIPS and ICLR and how those conferences are and the kinds of papers they have, it's a very different feel at this conference. So the first time we participated was 2021. These are all virtual participations, but usually what they do is they hold it in a physical location, then they have a virtual component. And this, in 2021, it was held in Kyoto, Japan, and then also a virtual component too. And we presented on Gibsonian Information. So this is back in 2021. We did this presentation, and of course, every year we've participated, we've also published a conference paper on the topic. So I'm going to have a list of papers on the Representational Brains and Phenotypes website that kind of go over this. So Gibsonian Information, for those who are unaware, is a form of ecological information processing where you have this external communication channel which has some distribution, usually a Poisson distribution, that describes the spatiotemporal distribution of sensory components. So it could be like things to see, it could be like visual features, they could be auditory features, they could be features where you have to touch an array of things. And the idea is that it's this naturalistic sort of embedding. So you have all these things out in the world that you can interact with. There's some distribution of things. And you bring them into the model, into the internal communication channel through sensory apparatus, some sensory apparatus. It could be sensors on a robot. It could be your sensory organs. But nevertheless, this information comes in, and it's all time dependent, but it's also spatially dependent. There's this communication channel which merges these channels as well, or merges the external sources as well as processes the information. And then we have this decoding, and that's what we mean by Gibsonian information. And we can measure different aspects of the information as well. Okay, so that was the 2021 paper, and we have a conference paper on that. We also have an archive preprint in more detail about what Gibsonian information entails. The 2022 conference was held in Guadalajara, Mexico, but also virtual. So this was this paper here, which we presented, layers, folds, and semi-neuronal information processing. So this grows out of this work that our group has done on what we call metabrains. So we presented on metabrains in different venues. So metabrains are these layered models that, and I'm not showing it here, but basically the different layers are different levels of representation. So you have a bottom layer representation that might be like a neural network, which is a minimal amount of representation, meaning it's just a network and you push data into it and you can discover patterns in a bottom-up fashion, and there's no representational framework or very little of a representational framework to work from. Then you have these other levels above it, which actually have progressively more representational power. So you might have a neural network on the bottom, then you might have some sort of dictionary or mapping in the middle, and then eventually you might build up to like a symbolic model on the top, where you're using different types of symbols and mapping things to symbols. Basically, it's an approach to build these neurosymbolic models, but it's done in a way that sort of mimics biology, or at least the way that things get processed, say, in neocortex or in other parts of the brain. In neocortex, we have these 6-layered structures. In other parts of the brain, we have these 2-layered structures. And a lot of organisms, they have maybe 2-layered structures that predominate in their brains. So these are biological systems, or they mimic biological systems. And in this paper, what we were doing was exploring that metaphor further. So we actually built these different types of structures where you have the layers, but they're arranged in this sort of topology. So in the paper, I think we talked about the gut, which is in neuroscience known as the mini brain, and thinking about the gut as being this layered information processing organ where, it's not the brain, but it has like these different layers of representation where you have things coming in from the different, like the enteric nervous system and other nerve endings and things like that that are sensing things in the local environment, getting information from the rest of the body, and integrating that information. And so that's what this is, kind of illustrating that idea that, you have not only these layers, but you have this topology. And so this is very much part of this embodiment program. So, we're thinking about this also in terms of embodiment. We're putting models into the world in a way that's embodied in a larger structure. And then this down here just shows like a compositional approach to this, where you're putting these models together and putting these layers together in a developmental context. So that's kind of what that is. In 2023, they held Bica in Ningbo, China, which is, it was also a virtual component to it, but, this was I don't remember the theme. They usually don't have a theme. They just kind of hold it either in conjunction with another conference or a standalone conference. So this was, I think, a standalone conference. And at 2020, in the 2023 meeting, we had this paper, Superperformance, Sampling, Planning, and Ecological Information. So we're drawing a little bit from the Gibsonian stuff, but also drawing from this other idea of superperformance. And what superperformance means is that you have a nervous system and it generates behavior. And the nervous system has a capacity for sampling the environment, and it has a capacity for planning like movements in the future or things like that. So the metaphor we used was a person trying to swat a fly or capture a fly in their hand. The fly has a nervous system or a visual system that has a much higher sampling rate than the human visual system. And so you're tracking the fly, and you're able to track the fly's movement. And you have to coordinate your hand to catch the fly. And that all happens at a certain speed because your muscles are limited by a certain speed uh, generating movement and power, and your visual system is limited by its own resolution, whereas the fly has a different sampling rate and a different resolution available to it. So flies are higher samplers or maybe even super samplers, whereas humans tend towards a super planning rather than super sampling. And the idea here was that we explored these different regimes of super planner, super sampler, sort of an optimal trade-off between the two, and then a relativistic regime where you can have both super samplers and super planners. And so that was that paper, and was just thinking about how you might have like agents that are super planners and super samplers, and how they might compete in the same environment, or how they might build off of one another in the same environment. And I think we introduced pursuit evasion game, and we presented some other types of coevolutionary models to show how that might work. So your agent is actually doing these sorts of things. They have this planning capacity or the sampling capacity, and they're interacting with each other. So you could use this for like social robotics, or for putting together sort of a super cognition, like a collective cognition or something like that. Okay, so this is an example of what I was talking about before. This is a figure from the talk where humans have a visual sampling rate of 16 hertz, or maybe a little higher than 16 hertz. Drosophila, which is the fruit fly, has a visual sampling rate that's much higher, between 60 and 100 hertz. And then Glossina, which is another insect, samples their environment between 85 and 205 hertz. So you can see this variation in visual sampling, and they exist in this continuum of sampling rate. And I know they have different types of eyes, but those different types of eyes enable this sort of super sampling versus maybe not super sampling. And then humans have this capacity for planning, which is maybe higher than in insects, where we have, learning memory apparatus. I mean, I don't know how to, we didn't quantify that in this paper, but it sort of goes on this continuum as well. So then in 2024, Bica was part of the AGI conference, which was held in Seattle. And of course, we had the virtual component. And this is where I presented alone on the allostasis machines idea that we've been developing over the last several years. These are what these little allostasis machines are, these agents that maintain what we call allostasis, or they exist in a dynamic environment, and they have to maintain an equilibrium, but it can be at different states. And so, when you perturb an agent from its normal behavior, it can adapt to that, but it adapts to different stable states as you perturb it. So it's always finding a new state, and it's able to exhibit this great resilience and robustness. And so the cognitive model here is incorporating this allostatic component, or this allostatic response, into an agent that uses some sort of simple, intelligent program. So that's what this was all about. And we presented this back in 2021 to a different type of group. So we were applying it more to human-computer interaction. In this case, this is more about the cognitive architecture. And so this is an example where you have sensory information coming into this internal model, which is the intelligence. And then you have this map where you have this trajectory of output, and you perturb the trajectory of output so that it either, the trajectory becomes unstable, or it finds a new state. And so our trajectory is able to recover and find different states, stable states. And the idea is you develop an internal model that's robust enough so that you never get lost. You always find a stable state. And this can be stated in terms of sampling rate. So you sample your environment at a certain rate. and you find points in which you have different dynamical systems properties, and that's pretty much what that paper was about. So we've done 2 papers on that topic, and again, we're always trying to develop new techniques for these different areas. And then finally, this year we presented this paper, The Augmentation of Intelligent Agents for Human-Machine Superperformance. So this is kind of building on the talk from 2023, where we talked about superperformance. And if you go back to that, we have super planning and super sample, or we have this relativistic regime where we have a high sampling rate and a high planning rate. And so that's what we mean by super performance, to have both of those at the same time. And what we argue in this paper is that performance, that super performance, is achieved through what the cyberneticist W.R. Ashby called an intelligence amplifier. So he proposed that you can amplify intelligence by having a certain baseline intelligence, interacting with the environment, and getting positive feedback from the environment that would improve the level of intelligence, would bootstrap intelligence in an agent. And so, it's something that is, it's like this approach that's called intelligence augmentation. So instead of building an AI where you try to build it of the highest level of intelligence, you interact, or you have an agent that interacts with a human, and then it learns from the human, and the human learns from the model, and there's this mutual bootstrapping that happens. And in this case, there's a world model that exists, so there's this intelligent agent that's doing this with a world model. So it's this intelligent agent that might be like a neural network, or it could be a biological intelligent agent. And they're interacting with this world model, which is this representation of the world. So you have this representation of all things you might encounter in the world, and then that world model gets refined, and the intelligence of the intelligent agent gets refined through these measurements of intelligence that we propose in the paper. Okay, so that's that. And then I just wanted to finally show this map of our Bica accomplishments for the past several years. So we have this theme, layers, folds, and metabrains, which we've done a number of presentations on. We actually did one at Artificial Life in 2020. We did another one at a agent-based modeling conference in 2021. We did one at Neuromatch 5, Bica in 2022, and the EI workshop, which is the human-computer interaction one, in 2022. Then we have this theme of Gibsonian information we presented at Neuromatch 4, at Bica, and in an archive paper in 2024. We also did the Allostasis machines work, which was presented at SIGCHI in 2021. I'm sorry, EI workshop was not human-computer interaction, it was embodied intelligence. So that was in 2022 for the layers, folds, and metabrains. SIGCHI was human-computer interaction in 2021 for allostasis machines. Then we presented that at Bica in 2024. And we also presented that at the Immerse conference, which was a VR conference in 2024. And then finally, we have the super performers, which is kind of an emerging area. We presented at Bica 2023 and Bica 2025.